Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to Law Day. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance, which is going to be led by Neelan.
Oh, it is. Don't tell me that.
Yeah.
Everybody ready? I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Neelan.
Yes, ma'am.
And we would like to thank our annual sponsors. We have NOTA by M&T Bank, Westminster Communities of Bradenton, Bar Prep Hero, Ruby, South State Bank, Manatee Community Foundation, Firkins Automotive, Connect Central, Porges, Hamlin, Knowles, and Hawk, Barnes Walker, Lutz, Bobo, Telfer, Purcell, and Purdy, Forensic CPAs, and Upchurch, Watson, White, and Max Mediation Group. We would also like to thank METV for filming today and Imperial Court Reporting for our giveaway items. We appreciate our sponsors. They have made us be able to bring our lunch to you today. We have 3 beach bags to give away, courtesy of Imperial Court Reporting. So everybody should have received a ticket when they came in. And Grace Ann is going to...
Want me to pick?
Go ahead.
Depends who paid me the most money.
Oh, Steve.
Look at your ticket.
All right. The last 3 numbers on the ticket is 628.
Woohoo! Come on up, Paul. Pick the bag.
I need to double check your ticket. You gotta make sure that that matches. Okay, it's legit.
It's good.
It's legit.
You're good. All right, we have another one. Ready? There you go.
The last 3 numbers are 653.
653. Oh, Alex. Yay!
All right.
Come and pick a bag.
Any bag.
Any bag. You gonna check her ticket?
I believe her.
She looks legit.
I
We believe her.
I believe her.
Last one.
635. Up.
All right. Come on up. South State. There's your bag. Thank you, Imperial.
Thank you so much, Imperial Court Reporting. The Manatee County Bar Association Nominating Committee is announcing its 2023-24 slate as follows. Aaron Crittenden as president, Dustin Wagner as president-elect, David Wilcox as treasurer, Brian Iden as secretary, and directors are Robert Ferentz, James Lynch, Andre Perrone, Alex Nicodemi, Dan Van Eden, Patrick Barnes will be the YLD president, and I will be the immediate past president. The real property section is having a CLE with the clerk of court and her team on Tuesday, June 13th at the Manatee County Judicial Center. Registration is open. Please check your emails for the RSVP link. There will be an investiture for Judge Felix this Friday, June 2nd at the Sarasota County Commission chambers at 4 p.m. Last year, the Board of Directors decided to pick a topic for Law Day that was local. And we had many ideas that were thrown around, and we settled on a local case that made national news and even made it to the President of the United States desk. Many here remember the story, others like me do not. It took a team to gather all the pieces for today's presentation. A few to mention are Neelan Kirkland, James Lynch, Bob Ferentz, Grace Frederico, Charles Clapsaddle, and of course, Donnie Clark, Ed Childs, and more. We'll have a table set up if you would like to purchase Donnie's book or other items after the conclusion of the luncheon. Please stop by and check it out. So with that, let me turn the event over to Neelan Kirkland for the Myakka Gold Story Unrolled. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Faith, very much. We don't have a lot of time, and we got a lot of stories we could tell, so we're going to try to condense it and give you a brief synopsis of what happened back in the 70s and the 80s in Manatee County. I'm going to start it off in just a moment with a little entertainment, and we thought that we would give you something to remember from a bar association meeting, which you've not had in the past. I don't smoke, so if I get sick, it's my fault. Hit it.
I went home with the waitress, the way I always do. How was I to know she was with the Russians too? I was gambling in Havana. I took a little risk. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this. Ha! I'm the innocent bystander. Somehow I got stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I'm down on my luck. Yes, I'm down on my luck. Well, I'm down on my luck. I'm hiding in Honduras. I'm a desperate man. Send lawyers, guns, and money. This shit has hit the fan. Guns and money. Send lawyers, guns and money. Send lawyers, guns and money.
Anyway, that was my opening statement. I represented Donnie Clark many years ago, briefly, in Manatee County back in 1987 on some forfeiture charges. And what they should have realized is Donnie's a farmer. Farmers always have guns, but they wanted to take his guns. But we worked that out. But what happened with Donnie is a very, very unusual situation. And what I want to say is Donnie was arrested in 1985 for growing marijuana here in the state of Florida. He was then later charged in federal court with conspiracy. And he was convicted because Donnie is probably one of the most honest guys I've ever met. He said, I didn't do anything after those state charges. Of course, we know the feds brought the charges against him. He was convicted. He was sentenced to life. He was commuted in 2001 by Bill Clinton. And we're going to show a short video of Donnie. And then after that, I'm going to have Candy, who's here, his former wife. Sonia, his longtime girlfriend, is here. It's a family affair, right? And she's going to get up here and say what she did briefly with Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and how she worked for years to get the paperwork in front of Bill Clinton. So Bill, I never inhaled. So Bill would sign it. Anyway, with that, let's start the video, Charles.
And then I said, hell, I can do this. The only place I knew I grew it was had a big swamp there, about 5 acres. And all around the edges, left all the tall trees up in the middle of them. We just laid them down. Yeah, we worked on it. And Gary come over, some worked a little bit. Oh, your dad was still going to high school. We had 50 tubs, and we put 3 plants to a tub. Put them in it, then we painted it green and put spots all over it so you couldn't even tell. I was there all the time, and I'd check on the plants. Get up in the morning, and I'd check them in the evening, and here comes this helicopter in. He dropped down. Hell, he went from here to that wall right there front.
No way.
He flew around, y'all smoking. He was blowing everything all hell, and he went all the way around and pulled up. They couldn't tell. You couldn't tell it.
You had money, right?
We was growing watermelons, tomatoes, cucumbers. What else? 3 or 4 things. Me and Dwayne, we grew about 100, 125 acres. My big mouth always gets me in trouble. Everybody knew I was growing. They wanted to see my marijuana, you know. I'd take them out there and show it to them.
Anybody that came over, you pretty much, hey, you want to check out the marijuana?
Oh, they come to look at it.
Just because it was fun to see, cool to look at.
I went in and started cutting them down and toting them up to where the tall trees were. And when Dwayne and them got out of school, we hung them up in one bedroom there. Boy, you could smell that stuff. Dwayne, he was going all the way down to Naples, everywhere.
He grew along the interstate and swamps, right? From Manatee County to Naples. So that's what.
Well, he goes every damn where.
Yeah. So and he also did in Arcadia. Gary Huffman and
they were down. They broke and told everybody. So there was 130 some people that could have gone to prison, but they told what they know about it. So 28 of us went to prison. There was 9 of us there, the main growers, Dwayne, Gary, me. It ain't right, I quit.
So by the time they were making millions, you were out.
Yeah, I was out.
You were just strictly farmer.
I already served my time, I quit, but quitting don't count. That's what the judge said. It's something nobody's ever had before, you know, got life for growing marijuana.
Hardest worker I've ever seen. I mean, it was totally different. Back then, you know, spankings were a lot more common.
My dad was still alive. He'd be in prison right away. Boy, he'd whip you when I was real little. It was at Christmas time, and I went in and tore a hole in my present to look what it is, and we was eating supper, and she said, "There's a mouse in the house here. He's gnawing holes in the present." Boy, did you do that? And I knew he jerked me out of there, and boy.
Charlie Wells.
Me and him been good friends for a long time. A lot of stuff I ain't gonna say nothing about, but
Yeah, really.
the only thing he got pissed off, somebody shot one of his dogs or put something in his mailbox. Probably just going around and getting everybody, wrote and signed on the damn post office. The first one we just had hog catch.
How many people did you think showed
A
up?
pile of them there, probably 1,000 or more. They could do calf roping. They put a hog in there, and we had 3 or 4 people that bring their wild hogs in there, and we put stickers on them so it was all the same pen, but you know, we didn't have bleachers up then. People backed their trucks up there and was watching it. Yeah. But one time a dog run up there and the hog hit the fence. When he bounced back, the dog got him and cut him in the throat. And there was people sitting on some blood splattered all over. Next year we put up a ring there and had bull riding, and then we had a rodeo put on there too. You were just a baby when they arrested us. I remember you coming up there singing that song, Great Balls of Fire.
Oh, yeah.
He probably wasn't even about 4 years old. They sent me to Terry Hut, spent 1.5 years there. That was a pretty bad place there.
Yeah.
I mean, there was anywhere from 5 or 6 stabbings a week, real rough concrete, and them guys would take shanks and get in behind a dumpster and they're sharpening their knives up. 5 of those mafia guys in there, and they never eat. They all stayed together.
Really?
They cooked their own meals. They had money, and they had the lieutenants with them. They'd go out to the rec yard and they'd play that bocce ball. I was the only one that ever got life, you know, for growing marijuana.
A lot of your friends told it, and some of our family, like.
Oh yeah, a bunch of them. All the guys while we was in prison, all the good wrenches, all drills and all that stuff. Everybody stole everything out of there.
My dad, I don't know how much money they made, so I can't tell you nothing exact. I know he made over 200,000 before he was out of high school.
That's when him and Mark got together. They grew a lot.
Marijuana laws were first passed in the U.S. in 1916. And it was an ordinance banning the sale and possession of marijuana, 1914 in El Paso, Texas. 23 years later, Congress passed the Marijuana Tax Act, which effectively criminalized possession of the drug across the country. If you go back prior to 1914, marijuana laws in the U.S. date back to 1619. Criminalization, however, did not begin until the 1900s. I don't know what they were doing with it in 1619 that it wasn't criminalized, but it was not. Over the next few decades, as levels of cultural acceptance fluctuated, lawmakers ping-ponged between flexible and harsh penalties. In office, Reagan signed into law the Reform Act of 1984, which created new sentences for about 2,000 different federal crimes. 2 years later, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act introduced mandatory minimum sentences for federal drug offenses. The shortest sentence was about 5 years. The rules at that time and continue to this day have stripped away the power from judges and the influence of prosecutors. U.S. attorneys were able to frame a charge, what quantity of the drug to include in the charge, and even whether to press federal charges at all in order to get a mandatory minimum. So at this point, I want to stop. I want to bring Candy up, if I could, please. Clark, Donnie's former wife, and I've known Candy. I don't think I've known her as long as Judge Ferentz, but I've known Candy several decades. Come on up, Candy. And she's going to briefly tell you what she did during the years. Donnie was imprisoned and sentenced in November of 1991. Bill Clinton signed the commutation of his sentence on January 20th of 2001 when he left office. So Candy, go ahead and tell them what you did. Don't be nervous. They're all friends.
Thank you, Neelan. Okay, as he said that after Don got his life sentence, which floored us all for growing pot, I still think a lot of that was because one of the deputies had testified there was over 1 million plants, and because it was a conspiracy, everybody else pled out, but Donnie said it would be double jeopardy, so he didn't plead. And the court did find him guilty. And so after that, his sentence came in, it was sentenced for life. And I think that was a part of it was because of those 1 million plants were attributed all to Donnie. So I joined FAM, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, where I interacted with other families. I drove to their monthly meetings they held at Stetson Law School. Bob Beatty, Professor Bob Beatty, was our moderator. And he helped a lot of us. I remember there was one girl up there, she was a teacher in the public schools, and she was so afraid that somebody would find out about her. And because at the time, she would have probably been fired from school. It wasn't her that got in trouble, it was her boyfriend or her husband that had been growing some plants, something like 12 plants. But those harsh laws came down and everybody was afraid. Anyway, we wrote papers, we called our representatives, we tried to get the word out about the laws and what was happening to everybody. FAM had organized a lot of chapters in different states. So all the states, Michigan had terrible drug laws, real harsh, and different states had harsh drug laws. And so we all, Julie Stewart, who is president of FAM, had organized a large workshop in Washington, and all of the states had as many people get together as could, and we went up there and we met with the reps who mostly just had their aides meet with us. But still, they took our stories, and we were a large presence up there telling our stories. A local attorney here had told me that I ought to start on a commutation for Donnie, start working on his commutation. So I did that while I was attending the Tampa meetings and still meeting with other people. And one day while I was in Sarasota, Mary Price, who is the attorney for Families Against Mandatory Minimums in Washington, called me and wanted to know where I was on this commutation. And I told her that I still had a couple more character references to get. And so she said, stop what you're doing, overnight it to me now. I was able to pick up one more letter on my way to overnight it to her, so I did get that up to her. But I was later told, I don't know if this is so or not, but someone walked Donnie's file folder over and put it on Clinton's desk in the stack that there was sitting there for his review. And he did commute his sentence in 2001. He commuted his sentence. It's still difficult to look back at those years and to see how all the laws and the attitude affected the families of the incarcerated people. Thank you. That's it.
I'm getting used to this hat. Like Candy said, these sentences many times were against people for absolutely what you would consider a nonviolent crime. And many times it was the first time they had ever been in trouble. Just to compare with what happened to Donnie in 1991 to what happened to a lawyer I know prior to that and prior to the mandatory minimum sentences, let me give you a quick story. And I think we're okay on time. Are we right? Am I okay? And Ed, you got about 15 minutes or 20? I don't want to take up your time. I grew up, I was telling Ray Bellamy, and it's so good to finally meet you, man. The University of Miami star. Stand up just one second. Everybody know Ray Bellamy, played for the NFL. This guy, well, when I saw him here, I said, Ray, you and I are playing football in Miami at the same time. And I know you all don't believe that. I didn't play football. But several of my teammates went on to play in the NFL. Eddie Beckman played up there. And then guys that played at FSU, Tommy Warren. Skip Alberry was a deep safety at University of Florida. And then Andre Dawson was my teammate in Miami as well. And he and Andre are good friends. And Andre's running a funeral home now in Miami, right? So I had a nice chat with him about the community and the way we grew up down there in Miami. And this was long before these drug laws came into effect. So here's my quick story. I spoke with this gentleman this week. I hadn't talked with him in a number of years. Who in here was born before 1960? Ain't many. How many before 1970? And the ones that just raised your hands, keep your hands down. So that's okay. And after 1970, look at that. You don't know what Bradenton was like in the 70s and the 80s. The Orr House, where the Allman Brothers used to show up, and my good friend David Reed would give Dwayne, Greg, Dickie Betts, and a few others, and Tom Waits, who usually showed up drunk, free drinks after their concerts at Robart Sports Arena. It was a wild place. There was the Silver Dollar Bar that became the Wreck. There was the Stumble Inn. There was the Little Brown Jug. And some of you remember the Little Brown Jug. But anyway, my friend got out of law school and decided he could make a bunch of money because he was working as a prosecutor. And he saw these guys getting caught coming into America with pot. And he says, they're just not doing it right. So he got his brother, who was a commercial airline pilot, true story, and he got a guy with a boat, and guess where they headed? Colombia. They had about 40 or 50 grand in cash on them, and they were going through the Windward Straits between Cuba and Haiti. And guess what they ran into? The Steadfast Coast Guard cutter with DEA agents on it and Coast Guard guys. He got busted for intent to import marijuana and for having currency over $5,000, which had not been reported before they left. He went to trial in Miami. He was convicted. He had just gotten out of law school. He says the judge looked at him and said, "Young man, you're kind of off to a shaky start, aren't you?" Anyway, fast forward, he'd been a college quarterback, and I think some of you know who I'm talking about, quite a well-known quarterback at one of our universities here. And he was sentenced, but he was only sentenced, fortunately for him, to a year. His sentence was cut down, and he served 4 months at Eglin. And Eglin back then was a golf course. It was not a bad place. Now, you look at Donnie. About 13 or 14 years after that happened to him, and Donnie was growing a plant, selling it to his friends, and enjoying life. Then the state charges came. He served his time. He went away. He came back. He never did it again. Never grew another plant. Never sold another plant. And then 4 years later, he gets charged federally, and they fashioned the facts from the 85 case to fit into the federal law. And they prosecuted him. He got sentenced to life, and it was life without parole. Were it not for Candy, were it not for Fam, and of course, were it not for Bill, who, as I said earlier, I never inhaled, were it not for Bill Clinton, Donnie would still be there today. There are people in prison, federal prisons, today under mandatory sentences from years ago that have not been let out. One of the famous stories is a guy named Mark Young. And Mark Young was a broker, and he brokered 700 pounds of pot to be sold. He never saw it, never touched it. He got a life sentence. It was reduced later. Tommy Warren was the guy I was talking about a minute ago, the quarterback at FSU. And Tommy was 3 years ahead of me on the football team, and he was the guy that always teased me as I came along. But he, along with Donnie, and I didn't know this until this week, he got his sentence pardoned in 2001, the same year that Donnie was commuted. Now, both of these men came out of that, and it's been 22 years or so. Back in society, live good lives. One mistake almost cost them their lives. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Judge Ferentz. But before I turn it over to you, Bob, one more story. I was talking to Bob the other day. And back in the day when we were kids going to these bars at night, the Silver Dollar, I mean, I don't think I ever went to the Silver Dollar bar without getting in at least one fight. I mean, it was just always somebody's going to pick something with you, whatever. But that was back in the day for you younger attorneys. If you got arrested, usually the next morning, the deputy would drive you back to your car and say, "Don't do it again, son." Bob, it's up to you. You don't want me to sing.
Like you did? Yeah, you're right. Hey, welcome, everyone. I didn't think Neelan was going to mention these things, but back in '73, I was in law school up at Emory in Georgia, and I came down to visit my parents. I got arrested at the Stumble Inn and spent a night in jail, which my parents still don't know, so it was really weird. They just came one morning and opened the cell and said, "Go home." Anyway. This is like home week for me. Really, it's great. I mean, I have known Donnie and Candy. My apologies to Sonia, but for 40 years or more. But more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but I'm here really to introduce a good friend of mine that I've known for at least 40 years, Ed Childs. Let me just give you a little background. He can tell you what's going on in the whole environment today. But Ed was born in Gainesville. His father was a third-year law student at the time. Ed was subsequently raised in Lakeland, Florida, and then he went to University of Florida. He was a member of the HEO fraternity. I'm guessing that's Alpha Tau Omega. Okay, good. And he then subsequently played an integral role as the pots and pans washer for the HEO fraternity in the kitchen. So at that point, without knowing it, he was starting his restaurant career. Graduating from Florida in 1978, he went down to Miami, Florida, Joe's Stone Crab, iconic place, and worked on the dish machine down there. And then, obviously a good use of his political science degree that he gained at the University of Florida, but quickly moved up to the kitchen at Joe's. A group in Bradenton then, that some of you may remember, Wilbur Boyd, Lawton Childs, and there was another partner, bought the Sandbar restaurant at the north end of Anna Maria Island. Ed, of course, at that point became the sweat equity partner. But he worked there for 6 months, excuse me, before becoming general manager. That was July 5, 1979. Ed now has 3 waterfront restaurants on Anna Maria Island and on Longboat Key. He also owns the first cannabis restaurant in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, an interesting fact before all this happened, Ed, back in 1975, was the first warden in the monkey jungle when the Great Adventure Safari and Amusement Park opened in Jackson, New Jersey. His job was to patrol and round up the baboon section and keep 140 baboons in line. His father, Lawton, says everything Ed learned about life, he learned in the monkey jungle. Ed and his partners obtained the 8th medical marijuana license from the state of Florida. He currently is part owner of 6 cannabis companies, 5 of which are in Tennessee, where there's currently no market for medical marijuana. So it's interesting. I do want to mention, since we're talking about age and everything else, and I do see sort of veterans here. You all know Walkin' Lawton. Remember Walkin' Lawton? You know, it's about Ed. It's Ed's story today, but his father, as you may know, was state representative, U.S. Senator from the state of Florida, and a 2-term governor of the state of Florida. I hate to leave it on that, but in any event, welcome to Ed Giles.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think I'm going to be as entertaining as Neelan, but it's a pleasure to be here today and talk to you about a very interesting journey that I had with cannabis. I guess mine kind of started at 16, but some of the stuff that I'm going to tell you about kind of transpired later. And I want to try to leave some time for questions if y'all have got any. It was a real privilege to meet Donnie Clark today, and I remember hearing about Donnie and what was going on, and I'm very looking forward to reading your book, Donnie. I'm going to buy it on the way out of here. So let's talk about a little bit of the history of cannabis. So we all know about Manatee County's part in marijuana. Myakka Gold and all the stuff that was happening in the 70s and the 80s, and when some of our most colorful citizens from here got involved and were major players, some of them fairly major players in the business, and some of them had some long tails for that, and Donnie's certainly one of them. But finally, marijuana became legalized and in the state of Florida, and that started in 2014 when Florida passed the first act that was relative to that, and that was called the Compassionate Use Act, and that was made medical cannabis legal, but it was for only what is now considered hemp. So that's anything that is testing under .03. That means you're hemp and that you're not marijuana. And it was very limited into who could use it. The only people that could use it were patients suffering from cancer or for epilepsy. 2016, the legislature passed the Right to Try Act, and that allowed for full potency marijuana to be dispensed for patients suffering from a certain number, it was a very limited number of diagnosed terminal conditions. In that same year, the Florida Medical Marijuana Initiative, which was a citizens-based referendum, passed by 71%. 2 years before that, another referendum failed by 57%, 57 and change, so it was just short. And at that point, then, the legislature had to figure out how they were going to propagate the rules to implement that program. What happened, which was kind of amazing to me, was that the nursery guys obviously had the strongest stroke and the best lobbyist, because the way that you were going to be able to get into the system, the benchmark for being able to apply for a license was 30 years of continual custody as a nursery owner and growing 400,000 plants. So there was about 50 companies in the state of Florida that qualified. In 2014, my partner Ted LaRoche and I, Ted's in Tennessee, and that's where a lot of our cannabis companies are now, had bought an organic nursery, an organic grow for vegetables, lettuces, and tomatoes in Ruskin, Florida, called Three Boys. I was purchasing $1 million worth of produce at that time. I had just started taking over the lease of the Gamble Creek Farm out east, which we now own and operate. Please come see us. Try the market. Our stuff is great. Not growing any marijuana there. I swear. And I was buying into that and getting Ted, and I got Ted involved into that because this guy had gotten a lot of press, and he had Vilsack on speed dial, and he was doing organic hydroponic growing, and he had some pretty sophisticated systems, and he was kind of a mad scientist and a little bit of a charismatic guy, and he came with a lot of baggage, it turned out, but that's kind of a whole nother story. And so I was all about buying the produce. I didn't have any idea that it could be something, that it could turn into something else. And when they propagated those rules, Tornello's nursery, Three Boys Farm, qualified. He had been in the business more than 30 years, and he was producing more than 400,000 plants a year. And so we went on a very quixotic journey that lasted for about 2 years and involved a lot of lawyers, and involved a 1,200-page application to the state of Florida to try to get the golden ticket, which was one of the 5 licenses, and that's all they were going to do in the state of Florida. And Florida was stacked. So a lot of states did it a different way. You hear a lot about California, wild, wild west. You hear about states where you can grow, but you can't dispense, and you can dispense, but you can't extract. And you can't have your, so Florida did it in a stacked way where you did everything. You grew, you had the dispensary, you did the extraction, you did all of that, which was really pretty smart because it kept it to a smaller number of people, and the idea was that it could be better enforced and better policed, and I don't argue with that. I think that was a pretty good idea. But you can imagine what happened. Now, the executive office of the governor is going to be where these are going to get picked out of the Office of Compassionate Care, which was run by Christopher Bax. Some of y'all may remember Jim Bax at the time. And so they were very much about picking winners in that. And obviously there was a tremendous amount of competition to get that license. We thought we had a very good application, and we got beat out by a half a point, and we could see where some scores were changed and things like that, which aren't really important today. And so we did not achieve that license after spending over $1 million and doing all of that work. But there was a way to appeal that, and that was through the administrative law challenges, which I'm sure y'all are all familiar, can go on at the state level, and we took that route. That was another, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal work, and we were successful, and we received the 8th medical marijuana license in Florida. So that was up at Ruskin's at the where the grow was, and we were growing there. We were going through all the things that we had to do with the security and with getting the extraction ready to go. And it was late 2018, about a year after we had gotten the license, where we were very close to being ready to go. You may be familiar, you may be not be familiar, but Canada had the first kind of gold rush up there, and they had legalized it there to the point that the capital markets could be involved in it. And we're still in a situation where it's very tough for banks and operations like that to be involved because of what's going on the federal level, and we still haven't gotten that declassification. So just as we were getting ready to go and open up and sell product, the Canadians swooped in, God bless them, and they bought the license out from under us. Ted and I were minority partners. We were ambitious enough that we didn't want to sell, but thank God we were minority partners, and we sold, and it was a good financial exit. And we didn't have to go through any more of the vagaries and the things that we had been on in the journey. Where is the market today? The market today is 800,000 licenses that have been given in the state of Florida. 805,000, and we now have 2,500 physicians. We have another referendum that is going on the ballot, and that is for full legalization for recreational marijuana in the state of Florida. And as of the latest numbers that have been reported, there is 635,000 verified signatures out of the 892,000 that will be required to get the amendment on the ballot. So you're going to see what is the next iteration of that if that passes. Now, what's going on with the state of the industry? It's extremely fragmented now in this state. You have 22 licenses in the state of Florida. So they've gone from 5 to 8 to 22. And now there is 22 more licenses that will be awarded because of the population of Florida, and that's how that goes, and the number of physicians, and it's tied to those sorts of things. So you're going to see a doubling of that. Is anybody making money in the businesses that are selling marijuana in the state of Florida now, the legal businesses that are selling marijuana in the state of Florida? Not really. The biggest player that has 40% of the market is Trulieve. You will look at their stock, it's in the tank in a big way. Most of the other players is the same thing. You know, it was the tulips. Everybody wanted to be in cannabis stocks, and they all got in. And what happens when everybody rushes to something like that happened with cannabis. And the growing of marijuana, which sounds easy, it's a weed, is just as tough as growing anything else. Downy mildew, spider mites. If you want to grow high quality product, you've got to grow indoors, you've got to condition indoors, and that is very, very expensive, and it's very, very easy to lose a crop. So there are no guarantees on all of that. We talked a little bit about what we do now in Tennessee. And in Tennessee, that state has no medical marijuana yet. Every state around it does now. There's over 36 states, I think, that either have medical or recreational now in the country. But what they have is a fairly robust hemp and CBD market. Now, we see the CBD stores all over the place. That, again, is hemp-based derivatives that are coming from something that's got less than 0.03% of THC in it. And that is an extremely fragmented business, much more so than the medical or the recreational. And we see that in the businesses that we're running in Tennessee. Our business there is Tanasi. The main business, Greenway Herbal Products. Tanasi is the brand. Tanasi is the Cherokee derivative for Tennessee. If you have an interest in CBD products, we want you to go there and take a look at the website. We did this project in conjunction with Middle Tennessee State University and their Tennessee Center for Botanical Medicinal Research. They had a special purposes bill passed that allowed them to study hemp up to 0.06, so that gave them something that kind of nobody else had. They built a $150 million science center around the TCBMR. And we're doing a lot of work with the Chinese until recently when their legislature and their wisdom said you can't do anything with the Chinese anymore. As you're probably aware, Chinese is the oldest traditional medicine, herbal medicine in the world, 3,000 years. 70% of their products are extinct. They're trying to save those. There's no ginseng anymore that's wild unless you're in the Appalachians in North Carolina. So they were working with them, and they were doing a lot of the science. We did a grant with them to commercialize their IP. We had a university-developed, patent-pending CBD/CBDA 1-to-1 that they did all of the science on, which shows a 2.7% better effect for inflammation and for some of the things that CBD does. And so we're awaiting our patent review, should be in April. We've just had a patent review successfully in the United Kingdom, and we have 10 other countries that we are working on that with. And so that is kind of the state of where this is now. I think it's long since past the time, you hear the kind of inequities and the things that happen to Donnie and other people that, that we get our heads straight and we look at this plant that has a lot of benefits, and we find out what are the benefits that it has and it doesn't have, where it can help people that have sleep problems, anxiety problems, PTSD problems, inflammation problems, all of those types of things, and I think we're finally getting there. It's interesting when you look at the history of marijuana and what I call the industrial prison complex that was built around putting a lot of people in jail and building a lot of SWAT teams and things of that nature. And I think it's long past time for us to realize that this is something that we need to be studying and not putting a lot of people in jail in. And thank you very much.
Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask about anything today? Ed, me, Donnie, you want to sell those hats you got on, don't you? You got hats over here. You just get, okay. I will tell you, if you want a good read, see my little stickies. It's a good read. There's a lot of history in here about Manatee County. And when you read, Grace Ann's got the books. The books are $30, am I right? We only accept cash. Or check. That's right. If you don't have time today to get a book, if you'll contact me or Grace Ann, we can get you one, or a Myakka gold hat. And the one last thing I want to say before we get out of here, what time is it, 10 till 1 or 5 till 1? 6 till 1, okay. As Bob said a moment ago, and Ed knows full well because he's been around here, and Ed was in Miami, I guess, partly maybe about the same time I lived down there. We didn't know each other. But in Manatee County, and everybody loves stories, right? The guys in the east were growing. The guys in West Manatee were important. So it was coming in at Cortez. It was being grown and going out from the rural areas in Manatee County. And I have secondhand knowledge, but very good secondhand knowledge. I was told one time, and I you know who I really wish were still with us was Eddie Mullock. He had the best stories. God, he could tell the stories. But if you had a shrimp boat in 19 78, 79, 80, and you left the keys in it at night and went home, you could come back the next morning, there'd be a Publix bag. And in that Publix bag would be anywhere from 40 to 50 grand for the kind use of your boat the previous night. Because they picked up what was called grouper. And the planes would fly low, 10 miles offshore, drop the grouper bales, which were huge bales of marijuana, and the boats would pick them up. The other story, which again, secondhand but very good source, the bags of cash were also left, this is great, in the parking lot of Manatee Memorial Hospital. The thinking was that's the last place anybody thinks a bag of cash is going to be. And some legal representatives back then would get paid in cash, and the bag would be in the back seat of a car. There's your 40 or 50 grand for representing somebody at the hospital. And, you know, you think at the hospital, it's doctors' cars, nurses' cars, techs, and people visiting patients, right? So that was where those exchanges took place. But as Ed said, we've come a long way. And I was a prosecutor back in the mid-'80s, and I was raised in a conservative family and all of that. And I've seen over the years, you know, my mind change with respect to the treatment of people. I've represented a lot of criminal defendants in my first few years. I don't do it anymore. But you see in many instances, and the judges see it, and the prosecutors see it, and I've talked to Cindy about it, sometimes somebody does something one time. They made a bad mistake. But to take without any consideration where a judge loses discretion to do anything other than impose a mandatory sentence, you can absolutely decimate a life. So as Ed says, I think we are going in the right direction. There's still going to be penalties for illegal use. You know, certain people shouldn't be using that stuff. Certain people just shouldn't be on the road. We all know that. But we hope we've given you a little insight today into where things have come from in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and where they are today. Hope you've enjoyed it. By the way, that was my acting debut. I choreographed it, made it up. My son said, "Dad, please send me the tape so I can destroy it and not be embarrassed." Anyway, thank you very much. Have a good week.
Okay, we want to thank our speakers for coming out today. Thank you, Donnie, Candy, and Ed for speaking. And thank you, Neeland. We have some some tumblers for you from the Manatee County Bar Association. And the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all for coming out today.